do that. So would you like to start, Michael, and say how you found the conference and give your thoughts of the hour in 2 minutes?
I've really enjoyed the conference. I always enjoy PyCon UK. I particularly like the talk on power that Daniela gave, because it's not the sort of talk that you often hear at conferences. And one of the things he talked about was having a welcoming community and people who are new, and it just reminded me, and it's good to be reminded that we have a lot of new people here, and not just sort of talk. I come to these conferences to talk to people, to meet my friends who I interact with online, who I only ever see at PyCons, and just to be reminded that there are people who've not been before. And I've had some great conversations with people I didn't know, and I'm again reminded that the Python community is wonderful, and there are lots of good people. So, yeah.
So, I love PyCon UK. This is one of my favorite conferences in all the world. I'm actually a big fan of Coventry, although I'm looking forward to Cardiff. Simply because I really like walking around the downtown. But one of the things that I really like in my what?
I just took a sip of water when you said I really love walking down Coventry downtown. It came out of my nose.
Well, all square mile of it. It's very charming, and the thing that I've liked best so far is I like the kids.
Oh, hold! I've forgotten to introduce everybody. But you already knew who Michael Ford and Van were, didn't you? So that was good. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce the panel. Van Limburg is the chair of the PSF. You heard out who he is already. Michael Ford is a Python core developer and Go programmer. Is any of this true anymore? Any of this?
Certainly true about Python testing. I wouldn't claim to know. I work with cloud computing, but I wouldn't claim to know more than is helpful.
Okay. Larry, so can you just introduce yourself and then save your thoughts about the conference for a minute?
Maybe. I'm Larry Hastings. I was the release manager for Python 3.4, or I guess I am the release manager for Python 3.4 and Python 3.5, which just came out. I released it last Sunday from London. And I'm supposed to say something nice about Coventry, so I really love Nando's.
Yeah, actually, you might as well do that and say who you are and your thoughts. Carrie Ann next.
Hello, I'm Carrie Ann. I work for the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I also sit on the board of the PSF. And I was just explaining it's called a cheeky Nando's.
Some of the levels might do that.
Yeah. So I've just been on a bit of a whirlwind tour of Python conferences. I did EuroPython, then I went to Australia, and now I've come here. And I always say it's wonderful to always come home to PyCon UK, because it is my home, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys. So that's me. Oh.
Okay. Mr. Entol. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Nicholas. What is it? The highlight of the...
Who are you? And
I've already said that. I'm Nicholas.
Okay.
And my highlight of PyCon UK this year, I'm always incredibly relieved at 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon when the education track has finished. This year was just as successful as the other ones. Those of you who saw the lightning talks with the kids in it will understand that a lot of them, because you only saw a small fraction of them, but a lot of them went away, having had an awful lot of fun.
And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the science track?
So I'm Sarah Mount. I'm running the science track this year, which is new for this year, and it's been really fantastic. The publications panel is still going on upstairs. That's why I was late, and they're probably still ranting about how badly your taxes are being misspent and and all this sort of stuff. I think my highlight of the conference has probably been Simon Sheridan's keynote, which was really great fun, I thought.
And this is your panel. Let's see what questions we've got in so far. Python deployment story is very poor in all contexts except web. Does the panel think this is fixable? So across this way, start with Michael.
So I'm intrigued that somebody thinks that the deployment story on the web is not terrible. Which, of course, is where PHP wins, unfortunately, because the deployment story is drop a file somewhere and it works. Is it fixable? Well, in terms of Python packaging, which I guess is an interesting, an integral part of deployment, in the last couple of years, the distutils SIG special interest group mailing list, has been and still is an enormous amount of energy around getting this actually fixed. And wheels are a big part of the story, and binary wheels for Linux are coming. So I think it, as is the way with these things, in terms of what happens in core Python and around core Python, it takes a few years to really feed through. But we do have some very smart, very motivated, very energetic people wielding real power to get this fixed. So yes, I think it is something that is actually improving.
Are you just going to zip down?
Is this for anybody?
Yeah. Or, give any opinion you have and pass on the line if you don't have an opinion.
So I think that one of the biggest changes in the past couple of years is that now everybody does everything in virtual environments. This is a big step toward actually having things be deployable because they're more isolated by default. With what Michael talked about with the wheels, between those two, I actually think that deployment starts to become not a solved problem, but a much easier problem. And you can see a way forward between a virtual environment and wheels to some sort of binary format that you can just drop and have it run.
So this is sort of my moon on a stick kind of hope that as a Python community we can make it easy for perhaps those of us who are not particularly technical but who do work with Python. So I'm thinking especially of teachers and children. I've always been told to not speak so close to the microphone. So yeah, okay. As you may or may not know, in schools, the sysadmins, the people who run the networks in schools have a famously pleasant and sunny disposition and are really helpful. And if we can make their life a lot easier, it would be really helpful for us to be able to get Python installed places.
Great. So next question. What's the average wingspan of an unladen swallow? The next one.
African or European?
Async await, great or terrible. Do we now have two incompatible kinds of functions in Python? So ask Floris.
Well, the short answer to the latter part of the question is yes.
But we already had two kinds of functions in Python before because we had generators and non-generators. And so honestly, as 3.5 release manager and async def went out with 3.5, I should know anything about this, and I really don't. But I don't think it's a world of difference from what we already had. I think it's an incremental improvement, and it's keyword support, which is obviously the major change. But I don't think it gives us any new actual technological ability that we didn't have before. You know, async I/O was already built in 3.4 and didn't have these keywords.
And this is a language feature that Microsoft tried out, experimented in F#. They're using their functional language F# as a way of trialing features for C#, which is their big language, and F# had this keyword, and really it does make writing code asynchronous code that is readable because it looks synchronous a lot easier. And that they moved it from F# into C#, and it's something that's been a success in C# and in the .NET environment. So I don't see why, if async IO and that style of programming takes off in Python, why it shouldn't be a success. The jury is perhaps still out on that.
Okay, I'm just going to be straight on the next one briefly. We need to talk about Perl 2.7. I'm assuming it means Python 2.7. Supported to 2020 when 3 is already out. So why is Python 2.7 supported till 2020 when 3 is already out?
Because people still use it.
Yeah, the simple answer is the original support was till 2012 or 2015, something like that, and it was extended because there was a great hue and cry, and Guido said, "Oh, okay. Well, if the release manager is willing to support it, which is Benjamin Peterson," and he said yes, so we said, "Okay, we'll support it for a very long time, much longer than any other Python release to date, and probably any in the future." Python 2.7 came out in, what, 2008, 2009? And so like a 12-year support plan for that is really a very long time.
Cool, right. Going to answer them ask questions in my own order. So everyone on the panel, what is your favorite module? Starting with Michael and working down all through the panel. Yeah, you're the leader.
My favorite module is this.
Yeah. You can't have the same one as anybody else.
I'm partial to iter tools.
Whenever I need a module to use as an example of something, I always use ColorSys, which is pure Python and very small and very easy to play with. So.
My answer is Turtle.
Yeah.
I've been having an awful lot of fun with async IO.
Just one?
Yeah.
Probably either iter tools or func tools. They're both very cool. Yeah.
Great question. Thanks for the question. Is there any plans to make big improvements to C Python execution speed? It's like, because PyPy exists, then shrug, oh well. I can probably read that better. It's like, because PyPy exists, then, oh well.
So I believe I can answer definitively. There's no plans to ever improve Python. Isn't that right?
Okay, so Python is the product of almost, more than 20 years of development, of continuous development, of people trying to make it faster. The challenge with Python is that it's so dynamic that there's very little work you can do in advance. And still, people come up with these crazy ways to make it go faster. I mean, obviously, PyPy is making it go a lot faster with an incredible amount of engineering work behind it. There's just no low-hanging fruit, and even the high-hanging fruit is hard to reach. So we're trying to come up with ways to make it go faster. I've got a small patch that I've got. I might make it go faster. Mark Shannon was telling me about something where he wants to make it go a little faster. We're always nibbling away at it. But there really aren't any big, easy things that we could do to make it go faster, because if there were, we would have already done them.
A little bit more seriously, I know that, for instance, Intel is looking very carefully at this. They've got an entire team that's actually focused on Python performance.
2.7 usually, but yes.
2.7 usually, but they are looking at. They understand the necessity of 3 as well. And for example, in 2.7.10 and 3.5, I believe they landed a patch about computed gotos, which did result in like a 5 to 7% speed up.
That was a backport. The computed gotos thing was a backport from 3 to 2. It wasn't in there before, and yes, that landed, and it'll be in 2.7.10. So I can say there's one thing that's, again, it's very early days, but it's kind of exciting. So you guys know what the CLR is from Microsoft. That's the runtime that runs underneath C#. Microsoft open sourced the entire C# runtime. It's open source. It's a very easy to deal with license. I don't remember which one it is, but it's not a funny license. It's Apache or MIT or something. And so that means that the entire CLR JIT is sitting there in open source waiting to be played with. There's a Microsoft developer who is one of the guys behind IronPython. His name's Dino. And Dino is mating the CLR JIT to Python He's been working on it since PyCon US in Montreal this year, and already he announced some results at PyData Seattle last month, and he said it's not that much slower than normal Python anymore, which sounds, that sounds incredibly promising from my perspective. So I have high hopes, because he hasn't even started optimizing yet. He's just trying to get it to go. And so this is very exciting. This could, if this works, like 3.6 could be the fastest Python to date.
I believe Larry has plans to slow down your Python code performance by about 30%. I don't know if he wants to talk about that. I'm not even joking.
No, he's not even joking. But that's different. That's the getting rid of the GIL. My idea for getting rid of the GIL, which I haven't committed to publicly, and I'm not committing to publicly now, is what comes out of my talk about the GIL that I gave on Friday morning, which is really the only approachable way to do it is to go to what's called atomic test and set, atomic Inker and Decker, using features that are on modern CPUs, instead of having a GIL that's a lock over all Inker and Decker. We would just use the atomic test and set for Inker and Decker, and we wouldn't have to have the GIL for reference counting at that point. And that would make it a lot easier to get from here to real multi-threading inside of CPython. So that would slow down CPython by 30%, which is an estimate based on work done by Antoine Petrou. But then if you get to run, if you have a nice multi-threadable program and you can run 8 cores at the same time, the fact that each one of them is 30% slower doesn't really hurt your feelings very much.
Great. I've got a new question coming via message. Oh, ready, my phone. We've got a new new question come down through messages, which says, panel, what are your thoughts on static type annotations? Is it a step in the wrong direction? Is it the future? Will you repeat that? What are your thoughts on static type annotations? Is it a step in the wrong direction, or is it the future?
Okay. Static type annotation, first of all, we've had type annotations in Python since 3.0. It was a syntax change that happened when 3.0 shipped. And the idea was, okay, we'll add the syntax for it, and then we'll let people experiment with it. And here we are, 6 or 8 years later, I can't remember when it is that 3.0 shipped. There weren't people picking it up and running with it. There were a couple of projects online. They weren't compatible with each other, and Guido said, okay, I was going to let 1,000 flowers bloom, that it's not really taking off. It's time to sort of force this issue forward. So what Guido says, Guido gave a talk about the typing module at EuroPython, and if you have questions about the typing module, I think most of them will be answered by his talk. If nothing else, you will hear Guido's feelings on the subject about whether it's Pythonic or not. His answer is, yeah, it's Pythonic. It's not getting in the way of Python being dynamic. And whether it hurts things, no. It's going to be a real help for large code bases. So what I've heard, I don't remember exactly the details, but I believe that both Microsoft and Google were working on their own static typing information for Python because they had these large code bases and it was hard to manage it without having some sort of static type analysis linting tool. So he felt like it was just time to sort of push it through and make it happen for real. And it was a combination of that and other people being interested in it. I can't remember the gentleman's names. There's Łukasz was just interested in general, and then the guy who was doing MyPy, who was encouraged to make it actually compatible with real Python, which is kind of what the basis of the typing module that shipped in 3.5. So so Raymond Hettinger famously says that Python is Guido's language and he just lets us use it. And that's a really helpful mantra to keep in mind. Fundamentally, Guido said, typing is a good idea, we should do it, and he made it happen. He was very much a part of the process of getting it to happen. And so if Guido says, this is in Python, then by golly, it's in Python, and here we are.
Yeah, okay, so I know what they are, but in my day-to-day job, I probably won't ever use them, so I think that might apply to a lot of people. Where's Mark Shannon? Okay, if you want to talk to Mark about about this subject, he will be able to tell you all sorts of interesting things.
So I'm actually playing with type annotations as a root, as a place where you can root a type inference graph, so that a lot of places you actually don't annotate, but in certain places where either you have ambiguous types or you want to expose something via compile it down to C and have a C API, that is actually a place where the type annotations or function annotations using types in the annotation spot actually works pretty well.
So I get two more things here. So first, as alluded to by Nicholas, just to make it clear, since Guido was part of the authors for the type annotations PEP, he felt that it wasn't right for him to actually be the person who ruled on it. So he found a delegate, and that delegate was Mark Shannon. So if you hate the typing module, go and tell Mark Shannon, because he was the one who said yes. You're welcome, Mark. Yep, there you go.
He's hiding at the back
there
waving.
You go.
Stand up, Mark. Come on, stand up.
No,
Give him a round of
yeah.
applause. Lots of hard work.
Yeah. He's got a purple shirt on today. He's easy to pick out. So the other thing is, some people have said, oh, this is a wonderful idea. This will allow us to do static analysis of the code, which will lead to optimizations. And the answer to that is no, nobody's really expecting to use this for optimization. The PyPy guys in particular have said, this is irrelevant to us. We need so much more information to do our static optimization stuff than the typing module exposes that it really doesn't help us at all. We already have our own way of collecting this information, and it's a lot more specific, and so it's irrelevant. So don't expect to see the typing module actually leading to optimizations. It's not going to make things faster. It's merely going to allow you to talk about the correctness of your code.
Great. Okay, I'm going to cut in there. We've got lots of questions coming in, which is great. Keep them coming in. Another great question from Ben Nuttall. How hard is it to teach Python? What would it make? How hard is it to teach Python? What could make it easier? And we start from the other end of the panel this time. I work down, and bonus points if you say the word pirate bunny in the presentation. Yeah. A pirate bunny would help, right?
So it's okay because I've got a. So, yeah. So having taught Python in university, I'd say it's easier to teach than Java, and it's significantly easier to teach than any C or C++ type of language with no memory management. I'm not sure it's... Sorry, now. I'm not sure whether it's genuinely easier to teach than a functional programming language. I'd say it's probably about the same or maybe marginally harder. And it's probably obvious to all of you why that is. Things that would make it easier, in my view, anything that makes the language more consistent makes it easier. Anything that you don't have to explain why we're doing this now when we didn't do it the last time we explained something is really good. So things that might seem very minor and silly, like making print a function, in my view, is enormously helpful. Because why do I want to explain two types of syntax to students? It's another hurdle. So anything that reduces the number of sort of syntactic and silly and rather meaningless hurdles or things to explain and allows you to actually talk about computation and computational thinking and reasoning and problem solving, which is what you're really trying to teach when you teach programming, because programming is not an end in itself, is a good thing.
Okay, so I've never actually taught Python. I used to be a teacher, but I taught music. And if you think, 12 years is a long time to have sort of legacy code base, well, music is 500 years old and written in Italian and German. So when it comes to music, which is the only thing that I'm qualified to talk about, music is a difficult subject to teach. And a lot of it goes down to being, are you a good teacher? Good teachers will teach all sorts of things really, really well. And Python, the impression I get is that Python would be a relatively easy language to teach because we've got the Zen of Python, which means that usually there is an obvious way to do things, although famously there are exceptions to that rule. It's easy for children to work out the rules of scoping, because it's also a visual programming language like Scratch, although without the blocks and things, you indent things instead, which is useful. And also the lack of a lot of syntax. So when I was a teacher, I taught children who had English as an additional language or were dyslexic, and if you scatter semicolons and brackets and God knows what amongst your code, then it's just going to make it a lot more difficult to read. So Python, with its clean syntax, means that it's good in that sense. What would I improve to make Python a better teaching tool? I would want an education bundle, but I believe that my colleague to my left is about to talk about that, so I'll let her do that. Nice setup there.
I was going to say something really clever about other things. So I was in Australia recently, at PYCON Australia, and they had an education track. And what was really interesting was it wasn't just teachers. It really blew me away that the developers got up and gave a talk as part of that education track. And one guy got up and he was talking about running a coder dojo in Australia. And he was talking about how most of these children had been learning Scratch. And he managed to convince 2 boys who were about 10 to do some Python. He was really excited about it. And he gave this whole talk about all the difficulties that he found in teaching Python. But the outcome of that story was that Python was still the right language to be teaching children, and one that I would fully agree with. And I, of course, am going to talk about, and I have talked about previously, the many barriers there are to children accessing Python, which we can solve as a community very easily. One being the terrible text editor that is idle. Anyone who came over to the children's track would have seen a number of times the children falling down and getting frustrated, not with learning programming, not with syntax, not with any of the computational thinking that was going on. No, none of that. It was just idle being 2 different windows, which was a problem. But yes, I think an education bundle is definitely something we need, and I'll probably talk about that more in my lightning talk, so stick around.
So I have an anecdote here, not generally about teaching Python, but specifically teaching Python 2 versus Python 3. I interviewed Raymond a couple of years ago for my old podcast, and one thing Raymond said was that Python 3 is actually harder to teach than Python 2. On the first day, when you're teaching people like how to use the programming language to get something useful done, you often start reading stuff in from files. And whenever you're talking to the outside world, you're generally talking about text, and that means converting the text into Unicode because of the string to Unicode change. So in Python 2, you could happily open a file and wade through the lines and transform in whatever you're going to do. But in order to be able to do that in Python 3, you have to understand Unicode, and you have to understand the translations between bytes in Unicode. And the word that he used was, this is day 0 knowledge. In order to be productive in Python at all, you have to understand Unicode now. And so this is an additional amount of mental overhead that you have to have in order to be productive in Python, which you didn't used to have. So it's hard to say that Python switching from byte strings to Unicode was a bad decision. I think in general it was a good decision, but it had some costs, and one of them was making it a little harder to learn for the neophyte.
So I'll just say that I taught myself Python, and that was because I learned Java first, and I hated it. This was back in the Java 1.2 days, and it was just so awful that the way in which this class was organized is they didn't actually look at your code. You would submit a jar file, and they would run the tests against it. And if you pass the test, you pass the particular project. And so Jython 1.0 or whatever, the very first release of Jython had just come out, and I said, you can do it in anything, and they said, yes, as long as you give us a jar file. So I said, okay, and so I implemented all my projects in Jython for that class. That was the way I learned Python, and I was about 10 times more productive than everybody else, in particular because we were implementing a relational database, and I already had tuples.
Great, okay, let's get some more questions done.
Yes.
Go down, we missed a few. Okay, one word answer. Would you think it's a good idea to have a Python 3 long-term support release? What does that mean?
Could you say the question?
Well, we have a Python LTS release, which is Python 2.7, right? So should we have a Python 3 LTS? This is the first time I've heard anyone ask for it, so as far as I know, there isn't a huge demand. If you want a Python LTS release, typically you take a distribution of Linux that has an LTS, and they will support that version of Python in the LTS. So I don't see there's a huge amount of demand for it.
There were two PEPs about, I don't know, a year, 2 years ago, competing PEPs that were, the idea was to actually speed up the development of Python and speed up the number of Python releases. Various people have been arguing that we should release Python more often rather than less often necessarily. I think Nick Coughlin's PEP proposed that we would have, or maybe it was Barry Warsaw, actually proposed that we mirror the Ubuntu approach, which was every 2 years we would have a long-term release, and then every 6 months we would have kind of a short-lived release. Other people, I think Glyph, I can't remember, I can't pronounce his last name, but Glyph Lefkowitz had a presentation at the Python Language Summit this year where he said we should be doing releases so often we don't give them names and we don't make them any sort of official thing. If you look at PHP, there's just always a constant new build of the PHP language up on the PHP website. And you download that and whatever it is, you download that and you're off to the races. And they build all the installers and everything. And he was saying that this, I don't remember his point, this was one thing that he felt would help Python a great deal, was to actually increase the tempo of releases to, you know, every week or every couple of days.
Right, okay, should we do that one? Okay. So, a genie comes down and offers you one wish for Python in 2016. What would you choose and why? Go, Nick.
That the BBC microbit is a success and the kids start using Python on it.
Mine is that we re-implement idle.
I would like subscripting into byte strings to return a byte string.
Man is going to answer? Yeah.
This is very PSF specific, but I'd like to finally finish the website.
Sarah, have you got a wish?
I'd like to be able to package a Python module without crying.
Okay.
I mean, Python running 10,000 times faster would be good.
Yeah. Let's see what we haven't done. Do you think, has anybody got an opinion? This is quite a specific one. How, if at all, do you think the new syntax, e.g. async/await, type hints, affect Python as a teaching tool? How, if at all, do you think new syntax, e.g. async, await, type hints, affect Python as a teaching tool?
So I guess what's being hinted at in this question is that as we add more to the language, it becomes harder to teach all of the language. But I don't think anyone attempts to teach Python by teaching all of the language. The trouble is, as a developer, you do need to, these rarely used features, if you see them in code, you need to be able to understand them. So it certainly, in terms of understanding the whole of the language, it does have an impact. I've been developing in Go now for about 18 months, and it's certainly not Python. Python is still my first love, but it was coming to the new project, and I was thinking, right, I've got a big new project to learn, and it's a new programming language. This is going to take some time. And it was really quite astonishing to me that in terms of learning Go, I felt like productive, and I felt like I knew Go after the first week. And I don't think you could say that about Python. Certainly, if you look at the full object model, if you try to describe the full object model and what happens when you do attribute lookup, you know, there's a few pages of writing to fully understand that. So Python, as much as we may value simplicity as a community, Python is not a simple language, or at least not anymore. So yeah, there is certainly overhead in adding new features, particularly syntactic features.
So also a good teacher wouldn't teach the full object model to new students to begin with. They would teach, and
of course
that's
not.
that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with you. And that's the mark of a good teacher, is that they know what to leave out and how to analogize the more complicated things, so that they're mapping perhaps this new knowledge into existing knowledge that kids or adults, whoever they might be, can better understand what's going on. So the question here is, do you think type hinting and async and await will affect the teaching of Python? I don't think it will have any effect whatsoever. It's the teachers that count when it comes to teaching, not the thing that you're teaching itself.
That's what's unique about Python, is that there's a lot of places where you can get a little bit of knowledge and go a long way and implement a lot of things in Python. And then you step up and it opens up new visas and new capabilities. But that doesn't invalidate anything that you knew before. That's the thing that I think makes Python such a good teaching language, is because when you start with almost any other language, you start with public static void main, public static string void main, I think, or you need to start with importing the IO or whatever. There are lots of different things that you need to the day zero knowledge, which I think Larry's point about having some idea of encodings does raise that bar for what that day zero knowledge is. But there's lots of different places in Python where you can stop and you can be productive for a long while until you start running up against that next barrier.
So I've done Python training with Python 3, and you do start with I/O, because if you want to achieve anything in the real world, you need to do some I/O. But you start with pre-canned data in ASCII encoding, and you don't talk about encodings till sort of day 3. So I'd like to disagree with Raymond on that one. You don't. It certainly doesn't need to be something that features in the teaching. The open method still, the open function still works without talking about encoding. So I don't think it has to be part of day 0.
As long as you specify text, I think I don't know if it defaults to text or binary. Probably binary. So you just have to say,
no, because in order to use binary, you pass the RB flag, so it defaults to text.
So it defaults to text.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, the question's more out of order. Game-changing in-person teaching, like at Django Girls, are amazing. What more can we do beyond online tutorials, e.g. mentoring?
Well, you answered your own question there, Tom, didn't you? I think that the Python community is a wonderful community, and one of the things that makes the Python community wonderful is that people step up and they do things. So I'd encourage people to organize dojos, be mentors, run Django Girls, and step up. And then people will see the Python community. It's a nice place to be, and we saw that an awful lot in the tweet stream yesterday from people who came along to, say, for example, Transcode. Naomi was telling me they weren't Pythonistas, but they acknowledged this is a nice community to be.
So I encouraged a teacher to come for the first time this year, and she said to me yesterday, at the end of yesterday, I've never been in such a diverse group of people in my life before, and I'm having an amazing time. And her son is called Femi, and he stood up here, he has Tourette's, and he gave a wonderful talk to you all. So I think that just describes what kind of community we are, and why I keep coming back, and why you let me get up here and say the really stupid things I say sometimes, right? Because that's the kind of community we are. So if you're interested in helping people, just continue doing what you're doing, be supportive, run education events as part of your Linux user groups or your Python user groups, help with STEMnet, become a STEMnet ambassador. There's lots of stuff going on, like Raspberry Jams, start a Raspberry Jam or attend a Raspberry Jam. There's just so much you can do to help people. So do it.
One thing I frequently say is that the power of Python is the Python community. It's a great language. I really love it. But the thing that sets it apart is the community. And if there's one thing that I'd like every single person to do is to take responsibility for being kind, being considerate, and actually taking the effort to reach out, to say hello, to help someone else. Because when the community is all of us, it's not some other group. If you're looking around and saying the Python community is somewhere else, no, the Python community is also you. Start reaching out, helping, and your individual efforts collectively are what make the Python community the place that it is. And it is what makes it interesting and fun that's why people give back in the Python community at a higher rate than anywhere else that I've ever seen. This is a core part of who we are, and I think that's what makes Python and PyCon what it is.
Okay, that's good. We have, thank you, Dan. That was a good talk to end on, but a couple of people have asked the same question in different ways. So if you could steal one feature from another language, what would it be? And why is it in Python? Maybe just the feature without too much explanation.
Go routines, for me, would just be really nice.
Huh?
Go routines.
Go routines.
Yeah, or any kind of nice actor CSP model.
I don't really have an opinion on this.
Thank you for sharing.
Apart from that one, yes.
So I'd love to steal a feature from Python, but from a different implementation of Python, IronPython. Because IronPython was implemented in C#. The Python interpreter itself was implemented as an object with an API, so you could instantiate new Python interpreters from within Python. And then what you had is a new Python interpreter with a new sys.module, so you had a fresh, sort of semi-isolated environment for executing new code. And that was great to use. And then if you combined that with the .NET, so the security domain features, you could then execute untrusted code, and you could limit the access to what that could do. And that was a really useful feature. And I think Eric Snow, who has been around, is hoping to introduce a CSP model to Python through sub-interpreters, and that starts by providing an API layer for sub-interpreters. So we may both get what we want, Sarah.
That would be awesome.
If Eric actually gets off his butt and does something.
So, Michael, I have a question for you. The DLR, I don't mean the ones like very well, I mean the dynamic language runtime, that is what you were describing in .NET. What's become of that?
So the dynamic language runtime was an underlying framework that was then used for both IronPython and IronRuby, and it's still there, and both IronPython and IronRuby are still being worked on much more slowly since Microsoft spun them out, but yeah, they still go.
I'd want to steal Hotspot or the V12 JIT and the thousands of developer hours that have gone into making a JITable dynamic language.
Subprocesses a lot Erlang.
Cool. I'd like to take a feature from scratch, from Smalltalk, which is scratch. But anyway, enough of my issue of the day. So thank you very much to your panel.